Hi, I'm the Anime Hero, and I wasn't necessarily the biggest Stan Lee fan. I didn't hate him or anything, but I'm not gonna pretend I've been a huge fan since forever. I just felt that the way he went out wasn't good for him, especially now when people are capitalizing on his death. Obscure material such as his Masters of the Universe figure Standor may end up going up in price along with other merchandise, and people will start overlooking his passing. I just don't like that. While Stan Lee has been known as a representative face of Marvel, he has attempted to do original things such as Stripperella, who wants to be a superhero, and his anime involvement with Ultimo, Hero Man, and The Reflection, but every single one seems to fall under the shadow of his work with Marvel. When I first heard about Stan Lee, it was through the final episode of Spider-Man the Animated Series. However, I didn't know who Stan Lee was. It wasn't until I saw Daredevil 2003 with my uncle that I was told that old man was Stan Lee, who helped create numerous Marvel characters. Since then, my awareness of him has been more commonplace due to Stan's numerous cameos in and outside of Marvel. What I'm really curious about is how involved was he with the story of Hero Man. It's a really great superhero anime that never really picked up an audience. Its premiere date may have something to do with it, as by 2010, there wasn't that much anime fans or streaming fans in general. All the big fandom boom happened around 2013 due to The Walking Dead, the Godzilla movie, and Attack on Titan, and obviously the Avengers didn't occur until 2012. Hero Man was just too ahead of the curve, as My Hero Academia didn't hit US shores till 2016, and it only got popular by 2017. Hero Man is easily overlooked, but I really would like to know how much of the story did Stan Lee write? Did he come up with the villains, the plots, or even Joey Jones' characterization? Did he draw any specific character model sheets? There is just no information other than he created it with Studio Bones, and of course, he makes cameos. If you want to respect Stan Lee's rest, then watch Hero Man.
To introduce you to our brand new superhero for the 21st century, Hero Man. Hero Man Wo Yoroshiku.
It's been a few days since the news was released that the legend, the man, Stan Lee, has passed away. And you know what really sucks is that Stan Lee died on the same day that the Detective Pikachu trailer came out. And I was looking forward to seeing that trailer once I got home from a job interview, but once I got home and heard the news about Stan Lee, I was too sad to even watch it. Stan Lee, he has created a lot of characters from Marvel that I have come to know and love. The first time I ever actually heard about Stan Lee was the series finale of Spider-Man the Animated Series.
Excuse me, I'm looking for some guy named Stan Lee.
What? Spider-Man? Pam, hold my calls for a while. I think I've finally gone crazy.
It was actually very nice and touching, and this was the first time I ever heard about Stan Lee and knew that he was the one that created one of my favorite comic book heroes. Through that scene alone, I was able to look up even more of like what he has created, or who he has created. From the X-Men, to Iron Man, to Doctor Strange, the Fantastic Four. And what I really liked about this scene here is that while Spider-Man and Stan Lee were swinging around across the city, Spider-Man, he didn't have any animosity or any hatred to Stan Lee. Yes, he did create the character, he did create Spider-Man, but he did also create all the many supervillains, all the times that Peter Parker had to suffer, and yet he didn't really hate him. He thanked him for letting people see him as a real hero.
For so long, I've thought that I never got any breaks. But now, after all I've been through, for once, I like my life. I like myself. And for the first time ever, I wouldn't want to change anything about me. We all have to grow up sometime, I suppose. Even us, characters of fiction.
Thinking about it now, that scene has really touched me, especially since I love Spider-Man. Now, out of all the characters that Stan Lee has created for Marvel, I think the ones that I loved the most were, of course, Spider-Man, and the X-Men. I didn't read a lot of comics back when I was a kid, but I still tend to check them out every chance I got. But growing up in the 90s, on Marvel's side, I would watch Spider-Man the Animated Series and X-Men the Animated Series. And it's because of those two shows that I've come to know and love the X-Men and Spider-Man. Of course, Stan Lee has gone through so many cameos. It's really hard to pick which one was my personal favorite. But I guess there was one that always cheered me up in a way. Got me a bit of a laugh. And it was Stan's cameo in Captain America Civil War. It was a pretty tough time during that ending of Civil War. I mean, the Avengers have officially split up. They've gone their separate ways. Rhodey is trying to recover from getting paralyzed from the fight back in Germany in that airport. But then Stan Lee shows up and asks for a Tony Stank, and that did get me a laugh out of it. You know what? I think we all needed a bit of a more uplifting moment after what happened during Civil War, and Stan Lee was able to deliver that, and I thank him for that. Not to mention Rhodey making fun of Tony Stank. That was pretty funny, too.
Are you Tony Stank?
Yes, this is Tony Stank. You're in the right place. Thank you for that. Never dropping that, by the way. Table for one, Mr. Stank. Please, by the bathroom.
Anyway, Stan the man, I want to thank you for everything that you've done for Marvel, the legacy that you created, bringing us all these characters, heroes, villains, regular people, making us root for them, like them, understand them, relate to them. And even though you're gone now, your legacy will still continue to thrive. Goodbye, Stan Lee. Rest in peace. Excelsior.
You know, I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said.
How did I first hear about Stan Lee? Well, I didn't so much hear about him as I did read about him, because there was this essential guidebook to Spider-Man's universe, which I read when I was, I don't know, about 8, 9, 10, around there, which was one of my favorite things early on to help learn more about Spider-Man's universe and his powers, his origins, the side characters and villains, and some of the major storylines up until that point. I think it was published around 2000 or something, and in the introduction, there was this little foreword by Stan Lee, and he kind of talked about how if people considered him to be comparable to Walt Disney in a way, though he said that he was nobody compared to Walt Disney, and I remember the quote was like, well, if they don't, and if he's comparable to the Disney of comics, that might be something people might consider him as, or they might ask, who is he? So at the time he thought, okay, in certain circles I'm well known, but compared to somebody like Walt Disney, I'm nobody. Where it's kind of funny, about 20 years after that, shortly following his death, he'd gotten to the point where, well, within the realm of hardcore comic book fans and the general public now, pretty much everybody in the world who has seen a Marvel movie has seen Stan Lee and knows who Stan Lee is and has felt his influence and understands who he is more directly. So I thought that was kind of interesting in retrospect. Who's my favorite Marvel character? I go back and forth on this sometimes because Stan Lee created most of the Marvel characters and I love many of them. But my favorite Marvel character probably has to be Spider-Man, because if there is one character that is closely connected to my childhood and really was a big influence on a lot of the stories that I read, and a character that throughout much of my life I was able to relate to, and to some extent still today, I think that he's probably one of the most relatable of the Stan Lee created and Marvel characters in general, which is one of the great strengths of Marvel, is that they have very human characters that are very closely related to events and struggles that we all go through, and so a lot of times contemporary topics. So I think that's definitely a great example there. I love Spider-Man because, honestly, of his personality, of the struggles he goes through, a lot of his storylines, I love the humor, how he deals with that, and how that's kind of just a way to cover all the traumatic things that happen to him. And I think a lot of people use humor to kind of deal with a lot of the terrible things that happen. But I like that balance between his superhero stuff, but also a lot of the life struggles that he has that are honestly very believable, real life things that happen that are often intertwined with what he deals with. And I think they can be almost as compelling a lot of the time. And I just love his costume, a lot of them. I love his powers. I think they're very interesting. And I love his defiance, his, you know, in adversity, he never wants to give up, and I really enjoy that. And I think he has, honestly, maybe like next to Batman, and sometimes I think just as much or even more than Batman, the biggest, most interesting, awesome rogues gallery. I think, you know, a hero's only as good as his villains, and Spider-Man has many great, interesting villains. So probably Spider-Man most of the time. What's my favorite Stan Lee cameo? That one's actually pretty hard because there are a lot of a lot of really good Stan Lee cameos, and I feel like I've had a couple podcasts recently where I kind of answered some of these questions and talked about how good Stan Lee is, and mentioning some of the top cameos was one of them. I think for the Marvel cameos, it's probably the one in Amazing Spider-Man. Just the one where he's the librarian and he's kind of listening to this music on his headphones. Meanwhile, Spider-Man's fighting the lizard. And it's just a great contrast between this guy being oblivious and very happy-go-lucky while there's this chaos in the library being destroyed that he's completely oblivious to. You don't see it coming. It goes on for a little while, but it's just great. It's just great. But outside of Marvel, I think that his best cameo ever is probably in Mallrats, because it's the most extensive one, because it seems like it's who he genuinely is. And this is back at a time when it was a very inside thing that only people that really appreciate comics would have known who Stan Lee is, which kind of relates back to the introduction in the Spider-Man guidebook I mentioned before. But yeah, that's my answer to the various Stan Lee questions. So, you know, Stan Lee was a magnificent creator and had a wonderful influence, and I think he probably had a really great life, and it's definitely something we can all try to aspire to do. All right, everybody. Stay magical and Excelsior.